What I was asked to talk about was kind of reflect on my time in government and working as a civil servant with civil servants. Every now and then you come across people who really, really do go beyond the call of duty. And I'll just give you, I promise you this is the only direct plug for my diaries. It's page 597, January the 3rd, 2002. But just imagine what it's like being the person on the receiving end of this. We'd just gone from Egypt to Bangladesh, okay? So we've just landed in Bangladesh. The visit got off to a potentially embarrassing start. TB's suit was badly crumpled after his car journey in Egypt, not nearly smart enough to wear as we left the plane. All his other suits were in the hold. It'd take a while to find them, so Maggie Cleaver was dispatched off the plane first to find someone wearing a smart suit that would fit TB. We watched her through the windows, walking up and down the lines of people, eyeing them up and down. None of them was suitable. Then she spotted a young man at the back of the crowd and went over to him. His face was a picture. I think he thought it was some kind of spoof. But then Maggie was doing her best, this is f***ing serious look. And seconds later, the two of them were coming up the stairs. Ah, the body double, I said. He was a DFID official, gobsmacked to be on the plane with TB, CB and the rest of us. TB said, sorry about this, but as you can see, my suit's not in very good shape. So then this poor guy is stripping off so that TB can try on his suit. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't far off. The swap was done, and then we were ready to disembark. There was a full-on welcome, and then straight to the president's residence. So I thought, you know, good on him. There's a guy, he could have just sort of wilted away. So that is adaptability. That is turning up for work and knowing you never quite know what's going to happen, but you maybe just have to go a little bit with the flow. But it was almost, it's a bit of a shock to the system, the idea that you can actually just sort of spot somebody who you think has got a real talent and then bring them on quick. I think sometimes that there's a lot of people, I know of people who work for me or who work for other people that I came across, who sort of felt that as they came through the lower orders, if you like, the early steps on the ladder, that they felt they could sort of progress quite well. But unless they were then thought of as being the sort of people who'd get right up to the top, there's a bit of a kind of mid-career glass ceiling feeling around the place. And I don't know if that accords with something that some of you feel, but I kind of felt that quite strongly. And it became I got frustrated sometimes at the idea that you couldn't just, you know, spot people, really develop them, bring them on. And I know people who left because they felt that they kind of got as far as they could and they weren't quite, they were never going to go right to the top, but they felt they were stalled because of that. The other area where I think, and this again, I'm not sort of casting the blame, as it were, and I don't think there's any point in doing the blame game thing. I'm not saying this is all a civil service responsibility. A lot of it is about political leadership. But I felt when we came to genuine, full-blown crises, of which there are very, very few. I mean, I reckon in 10 years with Tony Blair, I reckon we had about 5 genuine, full-blown crises. Iraq at several points, Kosovo, September the 11th, and what followed from that. And the only 2 for me domestic full-blown crises were foot and mouth and the fuel protests. Now there were lots that kind of got close. There were hundreds described as crises, but they were full-blown crises. And I think if there's one point I would make about that in terms of how we might have done better, it's when there was a need which struck us as being an obvious need for cross-departmental and genuine cross-departmental understanding of a problem, then tackling the problem. It was very hard to kind of break down some of the silos and break down some of the silo thinking. And sometimes, I mean, Kosovo is probably the best example of that. The only way that we could do that, in a sense, was to completely transform the communications structure. And that only became possible because you had leadership at the top wanting that happening in the form of the Prime Minister, Chief of Defence Staff, the Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, the Head of the Civil Service, understanding this had to happen. Otherwise, we were actually not in nearly as strong a position as we ought to have been. And I felt, for example, with the fuel protest, there was a lack of clarity, an obvious lack of clarity, about where the kind of various departmental responsibilities lay in relation to this situation as it developed, when it was pretty obvious that you just had to say, right, this has got to be tackled centrally and quickly. And sometimes, if you're at the centre and you can kind of see and sense that that's what's going to have to happen and eventually will happen, it was quite frustrating trying to make that happen reasonably quickly. Foot and mouth, another one. I think MAF basically felt that if the centre took that over, then it was in some sense a comment on MAF's inability to deal with it. But sometimes things just get so big, a crisis becomes real, genuine, and in a culture where you're constantly being defined as being in a state of crisis, it's sometimes difficult to make that judgment. When is it really a crisis? Well, that really, really was a crisis, and I think only got sorted, in a sense, when it was completely centralised, and only got sorted in the public mind when they saw the military going in. So that was, and I think if I'm being absolutely frank, at the early stages of that, that silo thinking was a little bit of a problem. And then one other point I want to make is about this whole question about politicisation, because I have to tell you, if you go around the world and you talk to other people in other governments, they are frankly amazed that there's this sort of so-called controversy over the existence of a very small number of special advisors in each government department. You know, you go to America's an obvious example where there's a kind of complete change of thousands of top jobs. If there's a change of administration, likewise in Germany, or you have a bizarre situation in Italy where they kind of keep the last lot but then put a new layer on top of that. And I can't remember what the size of the actual Prime Minister's office in Italy is, but it's huge. So we have this fairly small number of special advisors who are there because in the end, and I think this is another point I think it's important to make, I think most people get this, but I think some don't, because I think sometimes there is a confusion between impartiality and independence. And you sometimes hear people actually saying that, you know, that the civil service is independent. It's not independent, it's impartial. But it's there to help an elected government put through a policy programme. That policy programme is often born and developed in political debate and political choices. And I think where my experience of departments is that the ones that worked best were the ones where there was a mutual understanding and a mutual respect between permanent civil servants doing what they understood and what they had to do, and special advisors who understood what they were doing and what they had to do. And I'm very proud of the fact that, I mean, look, you know, it's fair to say I've taken a fair bit of flack and criticism down the years, but I'm very, very proud of the fact that none of the civil servants who worked directly for me in Downing Street, I think I'm right in saying I don't think there's ever been a word of criticism for any of them. And that includes the ones who are still there and the ones that have moved on. And I think in a funny sort of way, they felt it helped them to have somebody there who was so identifiably, obviously, if you like, a political figure. And I have to say, I think I was very, very conscious of the dividing lines. I'm very conscious of the need not for me to overstep them, but also never to expect the permanent civil service to overstep them. And I don't believe that they ever did. Look, I never bought this line. If ministers came in and said, oh, my civil servants are this, my civil servants, some of them did it. And I always felt, actually, if a minister is giving clear direction and leadership to a department, and there's proper knitted understanding between senior civil servants and special advisors, then I think that, to be absolutely frank, is a pretty good recipe for an effective, well-run department. Now, I started with my secretary, PA, Alastair, and I'm going to close with her as well, because I do, you know, I go around the place speaking and the different events and what have you, and I talk about leadership, and I've got this, I'm going to give you a whiz through, like in seconds, my 10 rules of leadership, but I'm only going to concentrate on the last one. They are, number one, what I call OST, set your objective, then work out the strategy, then only after that be tactical. Number two, the best team leaders are the best team players. Number three, be bold. Number four, be adaptable. Number five, really difficult this one, stay calm in a crisis. Number six, listen but lead. Number seven, take your time if you have to. Number eight, deal with the media, don't let them deal with you. Number nine, get your head above the parapet if the SHIT is really flying. And 10, and this is the one that brings me back to the beginning, encourage innovation at all levels of the organisation in a non-blame culture. Now, the reason I mentioned Alastair in relation to that, we were once on a plane going to America, and the minute we arrived, we were going to have to get in the car, Tony was going to go off and make a speech. And the process of speech writing was pretty tortuous, but basically several of us, scribbling away in pen and ink, and then scissors, move A to old draft, page 17. It was the most unsophisticated speech writing process you've ever come across in your life. But that's just the way we work. Alison was the one person who seemed able to read everybody's handwriting. So that we were sort of fiddling away with this speech. I then give her all these bits of paper and bits of glue and say, right, make sense of that. I then go back to the back of the plane and I'm talking to the press. She types it all up. And the process then normally is that she show it to me. I'd make sure it was all gone in fine and then show it to TB. I'm stuck at the back of the plane with the press. He is now saying, where the hell is this speech? I've got to make it in about, half an hour and the plane's about to come in. So she doesn't show it to me, she takes it straight to him. And she's standing there and he's going through it. And then she says, look, Prime Minister, I know I'm only Alastair's secretary and you're the Prime Minister and everything. But I've read all the drafts of this speech and I've got to tell you, I think it was better. The central argument was better 2 drafts ago. So he looks up at her and he says, well, you better go and get it for me and have a look. So she goes off and she told me afterwards she was kind of, quite nervous about this. But she went back, she got him the old bit of origami with somebody's scribble on it and she gave it to him and he says, yeah, you're right, put it back in. Now, when she told me about that afterwards, I thought it was a great moment because that was her understanding that even though her role mainly was to kind of, look after me and type letters and organise diaries and all that sort of stuff, if she thought she had something worth saying, she could say it, and whether it was right or whether it was wrong, whether it was accepted as it was in this case or not, that she's not going to find herself kind of, being shot out in a, if you like, a blame culture. So I was very, very pleased by that, and it's probably one of the other reasons why I stuck her in the acknowledgements of the book, which I understand, if I haven't mentioned all this already, is on sale at the bookstand, where I'll be going as soon as I've taken your questions on anything you want. Thank you very much indeed.